Hi, I'm Eddie Sanaji, and welcome to your Finance TV's Crypto Revolution, covering all things crypto and digital assets. We are here with Adam Blumberg, co-founder at Interaxis. Adam, welcome back, old bean.
Thanks for having me back, Mehdi. It was a slow week in crypto, and by a slow week, I mean incredibly news heavy and just so much to talk about here.
I know, but before we get into it, we got some housekeeping. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to stay on top of our content. And always feel free to drop us a line if you want us to discuss anything other than regulation, Coinbase, Binance, and the SEC. But that's all for the show. Adam, it's been a very heavy SEC week, hasn't it?
It definitely has. It seems like they were saving up for this week. It's like kids are out of school, it's starting to get hot, and they're just throwing out lawsuits.
So it's hinging heavily on this regulatory actions of the week. We kicked off with Binance. Last week was about Binance commingling funds. Let's have a look at the next step, right? So the SEC is now suing the CEO, CZ, and Binance for securities violations. Is this groundbreaking, Adam? Yeah,
I
this
don't
is
think
it is, right? It is what it is.
It's just it's more of what kind of we already knew. We knew this was coming. The CFTC already sued Binance. Of course, the SEC was going to jump in there. And look, from what I've read, and I haven't read the entire thing, and from what I've read, there's some pretty damning things about Binance that are going on here. And what makes it even crazier is like the admissions of it, the as we call the receipts on, via email and text and stuff, basically them saying we're just an unlicensed, securities broker in the US or something. Like they acknowledge what they're doing as wrong. Another part of this, Mehdi, another part of what's going on with Binance, because we're going to separate it from others later, but another part of what's going on with Binance is it seems like they were commingling funds. It seems like funds were coming out of user deposits and moving into other accounts and potentially, at least based on the suit, potentially moving into, other funds, other investments that maybe CZ or companies that he controlled were going through and using. And this, that is eerily like what FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried were doing. And I think that's kind of the frightening part here. The frightening part is not are these securities. The frightening part is, were they taking customer deposits and commingling them with other investments in a way that I could potentially go to Binance one day to take my Bitcoin out and it's not there.
So we touched on this last week as well, right? The fact is that, ultimately I feel that you've got people who haven't been in the financial industry who are now obviously part of the financial industry through this crypto universe. And they don't necessarily know how to abide by the rules that are based around traditional finance. And those types of rules are there for a reason. They're tried and tested. And I feel like that kind of leads us on to Coinbase, right? So I want to, as you said, separate the two, Binance, Coinbase, whatever's been happening to either of them from the SEC. Coinbase, I see as kind of the poster child of having tried to play by the rules and go and, cap in hand to the SEC and say, hey, please, sir, can we have some regulation? And should have a little Oliver Twist popping up here. But, they were issued a Wells notice several weeks ago. And now the SEC is saying Coinbase allowed users to trade unregistered securities. Personally, I think, Brian Armstrong's all over this. This is kind of exactly what he was hoping for. He's going to dig his heels in, and he's now going to force the SEC's hand.
Exactly. And look, we all knew this was coming. There was a Wells notice several weeks ago, and you and I talked about it then. We weren't quite sure what was going to be in it. Now we know exactly what is part of the suit. Coinbase was ready. They had videos ready to go. They had responses ready. And, someone asked me yesterday, what's the silver lining? And I said, this whole thing is silver lining, because before yesterday, but before this weekend, we kind of knew there were suits coming towards Binance and Coinbase. Now, we didn't know they were going to be 2 days in a row first. We kind of knew what was going to be, a little bit about what was going to be in them. The SEC was going to go after them for unlicensed securities, for allowing people to buy, sell, trade unlicensed securities, that was going to be a big part. Obviously, what we saw with Binance that you and I just talked about, there's more to it. There's commingling of funds. That is bad. I am completely against, if they did that, I'm completely against that. And remember, if we want to juxtapose the two, Binance is a global entity. It is a monster. It is the largest exchange in, crypto exchange in the world. So what they do in the US is actually probably not even close to what they do in the rest of the world. In the rest of the world, they're a monster. Coinbase is mainly in the US, so this is a big deal. And as you said, Coinbase has tried to play nice. They're a publicly traded company. They have gone to the regulators over and over and over again. Please tell us what we can do to register. We want to register. We want to be compliant. Just tell us what we have to do. To the point that they actually issued what was, I think, the writ of mandamus to a judge that said, look, we have asked the SEC over and over and over again to give us rules. They haven't done it. You, the judge, have to tell this government regulatory organization, they have to give us rules. And the SEC said, no, we're not going to. We don't have to do that. And so now part of this whole deal is now, I believe, as of yesterday, a court judge has said to the SEC, you have 7 days. You will give some sort of answer as to why you're not doing it within 7 days. It's all very strange. It's very strange how much the SEC is digging their heels in and not willing to tell us what they're thinking or tell us what some of these regulations are, where everything fits, but then is perfectly willing to just go sue people in the name of investor protection, right? It's all in the name of investor protection. And the biggest part of the Coinbase suit is you have unlicensed securities, unregistered securities. Another interesting part, Mehdi, just, as long as I'm talking here, is, of course, in the Binance suit, and you and I have talked about this over and over and over again with all these enforcement actions, the SEC keeps peppering it with certain crypto assets that they believe are securities. And it's not the same ones in every suit. So Binance and Coinbase list probably dozens, if not hundreds, of the same tokens, but the SEC didn't call out the same ones in both of them, which is really interesting. And I don't really understand that.
Well, there's a clear explanation for that. There's Gary Gensler. He's got one of his Wheel of Fortune wheels with lots of securities names on, and he spins it every time he's about to write up an action letter. So now that's why there's a bit of a mix between the different names that are being classified as securities and those that aren't. So
I'm not quite sure what it is. And what's interesting about this, Mehdi, is Coinbase, as much as I've actually complained about some of the tokens they list in the past, because some of these are just ridiculous. However, they actually have a framework, apparently, and their framework uses the FinCEN guidelines, right? So they're still using regulatory guidelines, even though they haven't been told they have to. They're still using them. In the case that the SEC finally says, all right, come on in and we'll let you register, they're still using certain guidelines. And apparently they knock out 90% of tokens that try to register with them. So, if these are the 10% that get through, some of them, I honestly question, but it's just so odd that the ones that the SEC is choosing. And I think what they're trying to do is get courts at some point to say, okay, that one is definitely a security. That one's definitely a security. That one is. And that way the SEC has their own guidelines without having to say it exactly and go, we know what a crypto security is now. And therefore we can go to all these others that Coinbase and Binance and Kraken list and say, these are all unregistered securities. The court said so. You got to take them all down. And by the way, we're suing you and you owe us a bunch of fines.
That sounds like a plan, right? And that seems like a playbook for the SEC right now.
Right. And Mehdi, to go back to the beginning of this, was Brian Armstrong ready? Was their legal team ready? Absolutely. And I think this is all a good thing. I mean, we saw the price drop, the price of Bitcoin drop, right, when the Binance suit came out, even more when the Coinbase suit came out. And then it came right back. I mean, Bitcoin literally took up the entire, if you look at a chart, green candle, right? There was a huge red candle, a huge down day Monday. Tuesday, it actually went up higher than it started Monday. Bitcoin was higher than it started at the end of the day. That's the crypto world going, all right, we're ready for this fight because Coinbase is ready for it. Because before this, when there was just a Wells notice, there was nothing Coinbase could do. They could argue and argue and argue and go public and everything and saying things need to change. We need clarity, but they had no legal means to go get it. Now they have the legal means to fight and go, all right, we're going to get this in court. And another part to remember where we said, look, not much has changed from 3 days ago till now is these are both going to take years to settle. This is going to be a long time in the process.
Well, we've also seen, going into our regulatory piece, which kind of blends nicely with our macro piece, the House Republicans also push for crypto oversight, right? So last week we saw McHenry, who's the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, and Thompson, who's the chairman of the House Committee on Agriculture. They released a draft of legislation providing a statutory framework for digital asset regulation, and it's intended to provide clarity, would be great, fill regulatory gaps, which would be even better, and foster innovation, which is what we've been banging on about forever and ever, and every other country has been. And they want to keep consumer protection as well. So it's a 162-page document. I'm sure you dived right through it, and can you summarize it for us?
Let me summarize the whole thing for you. Now, it's interesting because people hear this and they go, what does the Agriculture Committee have to do with this? Well, the Agriculture Committee is over the CFTC, right? So the two regulatory bodies we've been talking about, the SEC and the CFTC, are governed by the Financial Services Committee and the Agriculture Committee. So the heads of those two groups got together and said, how can we make this make sense? Instead of our two regulatory organizations fighting and butting heads, why don't we bring some regulatory clarity here? And remember, this is just a draft. A draft of this bill sets forth a lot of the definitions that we need. So where the SEC is trying to get those definitions through orders and through lawsuits and going through the courts, this is the chair of the Financial Services Committee, the chair of the Agriculture Committee going, we're just going to make the definitions. We're going to create them. We're going to pass them through legislation the way we're supposed to. And then the SEC and the CFTC are going to have to do what we say. They're going to have to enforce these regulations now. And it's interesting because in the draft of this bill, it's the SEC and CFTC working together. It's at some point, some of the crypto assets get registered through the SEC and then they're administered by the CFTC. Sometimes the exchange or the exchanges are administered by one or the other, registered by one or the other, but there's a framework there that lets them work together. There's a framework for understanding what is sufficiently decentralized. What is a decentralized asset, or what is a digital asset? What is a decentralized network? They've created all these definitions and frameworks for how these organizations work together. And that's really important, especially when we see what the SEC is doing, right? It's basically now a race to see, is the legislation going to kick in first, or is the enforcement action going to kick in first?
It's going to be a race to the finish.
Right. And remember, both of them are going to take a long time. There's if we look at the regulation, the draft of this bill, if it makes it all the way to actually being legislation, it probably won't look like it does today. Likely by the time either of these either make it to court in the case of the enforcement actions, or make it to a vote in the House and later the Senate, we might have very different makeup of Congress. We might have a different president. We might have different SEC, CFTC chairs. We might have all of this be very different. And we might throw it all out and go, we're going to start over because we have an entirely different regulatory and legislation and legislature regime.
And that's, to be honest, that's more than expected, right? So the issue is, but the good thing is, the one positive I take from this is that there's pen to paper and the ball is starting to roll. And, hopefully, whether it's in 6 months, 12 months, 18, 24, whatever it is, right? Yeah. At least that process has begun. So that, exactly. I'm going to take my hats off to these guys finally getting that ball rolling.
Yeah. And we can look at the rest of the world. The rest of the world already has regulation. I don't want to say everywhere, but, some of the places that we need it. Europe, the UK, the Middle East, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and then the East, Far East or Southeast Asia, like Singapore, Hong Kong now that we've talked about, China starting to get there. So other parts of the world have regulation and they're moving forward with it. And it's nice to see that our Financial Service Committee, our Agricultural Committee is trying for us to get there.
I also believe that India might have some sort of framework as well. And that leads us on to our next story, bringing in America to India. JP Morgan, they're starting to embrace this blockchain technology as well. So they partnered with, I think, 6 of the largest banks in India, introducing blockchain to facilitate interbank dollar transactions. This is great, right? It's just a simple application of blockchain, which we've discussed over and over again. Why wouldn't everyone just do this? Because it makes simple things simpler, right? So
Yeah.
that this will go from a 5-day week, not necessarily 24 hours to be able to make these interbank transactions to a 24/7 facility, which is great. Come on, Jamie, get on the tech
Yeah.
band.
Look, I think it's good. And what we've talked about before is the evolution of technology. This is a natural evolution of technology. JP Morgan is not going to, sit there and go, well, this doesn't work because Jamie doesn't like Bitcoin or something. They're going to utilize the technology. So they actually have their own blockchain called Onyx, which is basically a fork of Ethereum. So it's a permissioned blockchain, meaning only certain banks or only certain people, whoever JP Morgan decides, can actually utilize and see it and get that and be able to validate transactions. So this isn't like it's running on a public blockchain like Ethereum or Polygon or Solana or something, but they're utilizing the technology. And this is not the first time JP Morgan is using it, and it won't be the last, and they're seeing if it works. And what we will see from here is, one, will JP Morgan try to make Onyx the bank to bank blockchain that they're going to get to decide who gets in and who gets out? Or will this just prove the case so that others will go, you know what, why are we going to use JP Morgan's? We can use the public Ethereum or the public Polygon or some other blockchain to actually affect these transactions, because we've seen it actually work in the case of JP Morgan in India, in the case of JP Morgan and some of the other applications that they've used blockchain for.
So staying in that part of the world, a little bit around the corner, but Japan. Japan has biggest bank MUFG. They've backed a stablecoin for enterprise. They're also going all in with this technology and embracing the stablecoin mania, I guess. This is again, roll on with the good news.
Right. And the difference here is from our last story about JP Morgan is they're using public blockchains. They're actually using several of them. Right, they're going to use, I believe, Ethereum and Cosmos and Avalanche and I forget what the other one is, but they're actually using public blockchains and they've developed a platform so that individual banks can actually offer their own stablecoin. So this would be the equivalent, Mehdi, of I go put $1,000 in one of these banks and they give me 1,000 tokens that represent each of my dollars that I put in the bank, 1,000 crypto tokens that I can have now in my digital wallet. And the difference here now is I can send you a digital dollar, a digital yen in that case, and it doesn't have to go through the bank. And if you now have the digital yen that is from my bank, you can go to my bank and you can get a yen from that digital yen. Okay, so that's how this is going to work. So they've created this platform that in a way that they don't need the overall banking system anymore. They're going to utilize a public blockchains as the transfer system, which is really interesting and juxtaposes again with what the SEC and the CFTC are doing, and juxtaposes with what JP Morgan is doing a little bit in their permission blockchain.
Is it good having all these stable coins?
I think if I don't know how to answer that question. Okay. I don't know if it's good or not. I don't know if there's going to be a problem. I don't know what the issue is going to be with it. I'm sure there will be some issues with some of these stable coins. I'm sure there will be some issues with some of the bank. It's going to come down to security and such. I think it's good in that it's kind of the equivalent of you get a check from, you get checks from your bank and you can write checks from my bank to you. But then there's that whole transfer system that has to happen in the background. And in this case, we don't need that anymore. And it goes a little bit towards what we were just talking about with JP Morgan. It's utilizing the more efficient, the more transparent technology for this to be able to happen. Is it good or not? I don't know. If we want to roll back a little bit, Mehdi, to some of the comments that Gary Gensler made after, yesterday, especially after yesterday's lawsuit announcement when he went, I think, on CNBC, and he said, you know what, we don't need digital cryptocurrencies. We have digital currencies. They're called the dollar and the yen and the euro. They're all digital anyway, which tells me a few things. It tells me that most of what he's doing is probably at the behest of the administration, at the behest of keeping the dollar in power instead of something like Bitcoin. But it also tells me that in Japan with the yen, they're going completely the opposite direction. They're going, no. We like this technology. We're going to let the blockchain and those platforms create the digital yen for us. We already have the yen. They're going to create the technology. We don't need to do it. Okay, so they kind of went the other direction with this. And it's interesting if we want to go back to what this means for investors, financial advisors, whomever, though all these stable coins are happening on public blockchains, again, on Ethereum and Avalanche and Cosmos and such. They all have tokens that you have to make those networks go. If there's more transactions, if there's more people sending these digital yen back and forth to each other, these bank issued stable coins, more transactions likely equals more need for that token and therefore more value in that token.
All very interesting. It's kind of cool to watch how Japan's ecosystem is growing with all of this as well. So, yeah, hopefully the US starts taking on board some of these other countries and what they're doing. I feel like we say that every week, right?
Yeah.
Learn from other countries, but apparently not. Um, let's wrap with something a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more fun. NFTs, our old friends. This time it's something near and dear to my children's hearts. EA Sports, the guys who make Madden and all these sports games, FIFA and such, they're adding Nike NFTs to their games. This is super cool. And this is something we've kind of talked about on how this tech can be utilized, right? It's all very exciting. So, I think we should all get over to dot swoosh now.
I agree. I think this is pretty exciting and great use of the technology. We've talked about it before. When some of these companies like Nike and Starbucks start using NFTs, start using blockchain technology, and they're not doing it as a gimmick or kitsch. They're not saying buy our NFT so that you can, get a something in the game. When they're saying we're going to utilize the technology so that I can own a certain pair of Nike shoes within this game, and maybe I've paid more. Maybe it's because I've won a certain amount of games and I've accumulated a certain amount of points and I can own these shoes. It's something of value. Maybe I can sell them at some point to you, Mehdi, so that you and your kids can play using those shoes. And maybe they're the super fast shoes or whatever it might be. I think that's a perfect use case for the technology. That's what we are talking about several times, is so many of the games, and I'm not a gamer, so I don't know enough about it, but so there are so many, single player games, whatever, where you have certain weapons or you have certain items that you accumulate. And it would be nice if you could own them across multiple games, or it'd be nice if you could keep ownership of them, or you could sell them, just maintain that value you've built. And so this is what Nike or dot swoosh plus EA Sports is doing, is I can own certain shoes or I can own certain jerseys or whatever in some of these games by virtue of my playing or by virtue of something I've purchased, and it has some value to it. And if we want to go ahead, Mehdi.
No, I was just going to say, and the cool part is with all of these guys, you have, like my son had some customized Nike shoes made for his birthday, right? So you've got that customized aspect. You've got the NFT, which you can see in gameplay, and then you can go out and have the customized jersey or shoes made to your liking. So you're bridging the two worlds of electronic world of EA Sports and the real world, where you're walking around in your new Nikes that you have an NFT on the back of as well, or your new jersey, and it's kind of, it brings it all together.
I think it's great. I think it's a great use case for it. And a couple of things I'll mention. One, just like I talked about in our last discussion a couple minutes ago, this is all based on the swoosh one in particular is on Polygon network. It means that the Matic token, and this is for financial advisors to think about, for financial professionals, right? It means that the Matic token is going to be necessary for all those transactions to move. If I'm going to utilize those shoes, if I'm going to sell them to you, sell the virtual version of those shoes to you or your kids, that is going to happen on the Polygon network, meaning the Matic token is there. I have to use that to pay for gas. That means, in theory, more demand for that token. That means the value should go up. And that's how you think. I'm not telling you the value will go up, but that's how it affects you. Even if you go, I'm not a gamer, I don't care. Here's why you care. Here's where it goes. Here's where we start creating fundamental value for some of these tokens. The other part I'll mention is you could see a scenario, Mehdi, where some of these professional gamers start getting endorsed, right? That you start having endorsements, you start having, people going, oh, well, if all these guys, there's a professional gaming team, I'm going to endorse, I'm going to put my stamp on their jersey, and they're going to pay for it. You're going to have companies that are going to pay to have their name on the jersey that people can own, right? So that's going to be the next step as well, is endorsements within these games.
There's a lot of cross-pollination. It's kind of very cool how we're evolving into that. So watch that space. Dot swoosh. Right. Here we come. Adam, always so much fun talking about these things with you, and I feel like we covered an awful lot today.
Yep. I think there was a lot here. There's a lot that happened in the last week, and I'm glad we got to talk about it.
Definitely. And I want to urge our viewers, as always, don't forget to check out Adam's course on digital assets and crypto education. The website's down there. And also, don't forget to subscribe and like Your Finance TV. This way, you stay on top of all the content that we're putting out, just like the crypto revolution. Until next time, good luck investing.